Hey guys, it's Dan. Welcome back. This is going to be a review of Wargames Atlantic's Lizardmen from their classic fantasy range. And as with some of the other reviews I've done recently, this is going to be another one where I picked up a single sprue, kind of tactically, because I found that this kit has a single sprue repeated 8 times. So I thought that in reviewing a single sprue, there really wouldn't be anything lost, and you would have a good idea of what's going to come in the kit if you were going to pick this up for yourself. As I've said in other Wargames Atlantic reviews, you have to pay attention when you pick things up from them because not all kits come with the same model count. This is an older one from them. This is probably like at least a 3-year-old kit, but I didn't see any other reviews up. That's why I chose this one. But some of the kits have 30 models, some of them have 40, and then several now have 24. And typically when there's a reduced model count from Wargames Atlantic, there's some trade-off. So we saw that with the Foot Knights where there was just a huge number of like weapon bits that came in the set. Certainly the most notable example is their Conquistadors, which comes with a whole separate weapon sprue to complement their main frame, which also has weapon options on it in and of itself. However, I was kind of surprised when I got this sprue. As I said, a big disclaimer, this is an older set of theirs, but that this is kind of it. And I was so surprised that I actually went online to make sure I didn't make a mistake, that maybe there was some like upgrade sprue that comes in the kit in addition to this main frame. However, I found that no, that this kit is this sprue repeated 8 times. And I found that a little bit disappointing, again, for the price point, 24 models, this is fine. However, comparing Wargames Atlantic to itself, certainly the more recent kits, I think that you get a lot more value out of some other 24 model count kits from Wargames Atlantic compared to this one. So let's do a quick overview shot of the sprue here, and then we'll go into some of these bits in more detail. And straight away, I want to have just kind of a disclaimer here that I'm not a fan of when kits do double duty like this one does. You can see that there are some sci-fi bits in here on this kit that is ostensibly a fantasy kit. And my issue with that is that I don't feel that it goes far enough in addressing the needs of sci-fi players. And I also don't like that there's like an opportunity cost to that including these sci-fi bits, there's some like, machine guns and some gas mask heads here, that space could have been used to include more fantasy bits. I think it would have been a much better idea to have either a separate upgrade sprue including sci-fi bits, or Wargames Atlantic is especially great at having a digital arm used to produce supplemental bits. You could have had a whole range of sci-fi weapon upgrades that you could then download that would complement this set. So I really don't know why these had to be included, because as I said, I think it's kind of like a throwaway option. I doubt there's anybody who is picking this set up because they want both the sci-fi Lizardmen and the fantasy Lizardmen options. Usually you're picking it because you want one or two. And as a result, because the sprue is already kind of sparse, certainly compared to their more recent sets, I think that it detracts from the kit overall. But let's take a look at the bodies here. Another maybe complaint is that there are only 3 poses, right? So again, with a 24 model count kit, I think you could have easily included one more body if the sprue was a little bit larger, and you could have then had 6 sprues of 4 miniatures. But you can see here there are 3 poses. They're all roughly the same. They all have a loincloth. They all have these kind of like leg, I don't know if they're meant to be jewelry of some kind, but they also then have this like back strap belt that goes over them like that. And that's a curious inclusion to me anyway. Just, I don't know, maybe it's a stupid observation, but I don't know what that's for. Let me just like back up. If I'm using this as a fantasy kit, I don't see any shields in here, and I don't know what they would be slinging over their back. It's, I guess, cool, again, if you're a sci-fi player, to have maybe like a weapon strapped over the back, because that does look kind of like a more modern belt option, right? But this, again, speaks to my issue with any kind of kit that's trying to address, especially something as disparate as the sci-fi needs and fantasy needs of a gamer, right? I can even give like Victrix a pass with their heads kit, because I think that like fantasy heads and Teutonic heads are much more adjacent than, auto guns and swords. But in this particular case, you've got a set that seems that it's trying to do 2 things at once, and I don't think it's doing either of them especially successfully. So those are the three bodies. Let's look at heads because they're kind of spread around. This is actually, I think, the strongest part of the kit is the head options that are included. They got a couple different ones. So you've got these kind of like gecko-looking heads. And maybe the only issue I have here is that they all appear to be the same three heads repeated. We'll jump up here to these heads that kind of look like the 5th edition plastic Slan models, or excuse me, the Saurus models from Games Workshop. Again, though, it looks like the same three heads repeated. You then have these ones that kind of all look like maybe they're meant to be skinks, something like that. And then, as I mentioned, you have these three gas mask heads. So there you go. In terms of weapon options, this is another place where it's kind of strange. Or I'm sorry, real quick, let's talk about, there's 3 tails that would help to add a little bit of variety, I think, to the poses that you've got up here. But there's 3 tails. And then in terms of weapons, this is another thing where I don't really know what this kit is for. So let's talk about the hand weapon options, because that's maybe my biggest criticism of the kit, is there's 1 sword, and then there's 2 throwing spears. It's kind of what they look like to me. And then again, think about this purely from the perspective of a fantasy gamer. That's kind of it. That's what you've got. You've got 1 sword, which is a cool enough looking sword, and then you've got these 2 spears, and you've got, of course, got left hand options over here. But that's it for fantasy gamers, other than these arquebus looking rifles, which are cool. I mean, I like those, but if you're a fantasy player, I don't know if you're going to necessarily see a lot of value in those. And then same thing here, you've actually got, there's, from a technology standpoint, there's actually a huge jump from these 2. And this one, this is almost looks like a cap lock, mid to late 19th century musket. And you've got these kind of earlier style arquebus that are kind of like a matchlock gearbox design. And then, as I said, you've got these 2 automatic rifles, kind of machine gun looking weapons. And then there's a couple of accessories up here. There's these little pouches. So those look pretty neat. There's some up here as well, and then a loose sword. So that's the sprue. That's the kit. As I said, you're going to get this sprue repeated 8 times. But as I just alluded to, the main problem is because you're trying to address some sci-fi needs over here, you're trying to address some alternate fantasy needs with things like the muskets. Because if you're a Games Workshop Lizardmen player, you're not going to need those, right? You really would be exclusively interested in this 1 sword and these 2 throwing spear bits. Excuse me, there's 1 more musket down here. So there's 2 of these brown best style muskets. There's 2 of these arquebus, 2 of these assault rifles, 2 spears, 1 sword. But still, again, I can take any combination there. Let's again, if you're a fantasy player, you've got those 3 options. If you are a alternate history player, you wanted to use maybe some alternate Revolutionary War era miniatures, there you go. You've got 2 muskets there, and then I guess 1 sword. Same thing here. If you wanted to do alternate Games Workshop fantasy, maybe these are going to be some kind of ranged weapon variant. You've got some arquebuses there, but only 2 per 3 models. And then same thing here. If you're a sci-fi player, you've got 2 rifles, 2 machine gun looking options, 3 heads, so you could theoretically make 3 bodies, but you're going to be reusing this same sword arm, right? Because as a sci-fi player, you're not going to be really able to use any of the other bits that are on this sprue. So all of this comes back to the point that I can't really tell who this kit is for. The sculpting, I think, is great. I don't have any issue with that. I've never had any problem with any Wargames Atlantic sculpting or details. I just don't really know who this kit is for. With that out of the way, I want to put some of these models together so we can at least look at some assembled miniatures and see how they look all put together. All right, guys, so here we go. So I built all 3 models off the sprue, and I did 1 fantasy, 1 kind of, alternate history variant, and then 1 sci-fi guy here. And let me just say, I really enjoyed putting these together. They were a lot of fun. And while I do have some concerns anatomically with the way that the tail attached, you can see that leads to kind of a goofy looking pose in my opinion. That could probably be fixed by moving the tail around or bending them. I have less concerns with that. And I think the end result on these are actually kind of cool looking. I really appreciate the aesthetic you know, something different from what we've seen from Games Workshop. This guy actually reminds me of the baddies from Abe's Odyssey, if anybody ever played that computer game. But I even like the stupid way that he's holding the rifle, just kind of like down at his waist like that, like he's just firing from the hip. They make some, I think, some neat alternate Kroot models. And here's like a fantasy guy, maybe is like something between a Saurus and a skink. I don't know. Again, I think the sculpting is great, other than the issue with like the tail attachment point. I think that these look really cool. So here you go. Here's one with like smoothbore musket. So there you go. What's the verdict? I think this kit shows its age. I think that Wargames Atlantic has come a long, long way since this kit came out, both in terms of the number of options that they include in their sets, but also like the thoughtfulness of design. One thing that stood out to me right away in terms of like quality of life improvements on these sprues is that there's no numbering on the sprue indicating which left arm went with which right arm, which is really important with firearms in trying to determine like which attachment point goes where. And so it made it a little bit tricky in putting this this kit together. But I think, yeah, my disappointment mostly stems from what this could have been, in that if you had a like sci-fi variant of the kit, that's fine, but you could have had a lot more options instead of just two firearm, like futuristic looking firearms for the kit. And then vice versa, if this was a pure fantasy kit, get rid of the sci-fi options. You could have had more hand weapon options, like some real spear options. You could have had shields included with the kit. So again, my criticism of these dual kits is that you end up with sets that kind of are halfway across the gap in either direction. They don't really fulfill the needs of either consumer. And in fact, I was considering that this kit, I think my biggest problem is that it's you know, advertised as classic fantasy, right? But I think that the fantasy offerings are the weakest in the set. You know, you've got two kind of antique firearms, two 19th century firearms, two futuristic firearms. I think this actually works better as like a, I don't know, post-apocalyptic kind of like sci-fi kit. If you labeled this as some sort of like Mad Max style survivors in a nuclear apocalypse, I think that it would be much more accurate to the contents of the kit. I've got quite a few reviews coming here shortly. I've got another Wargames Atlantic kit that I'll be doing. I actually have some transfers from a company called Forgotten Chapters, and I've got some paints from AK Acrylic that I want to review with you guys before the next wave of Wargames Atlantic and Victrix Medieval stuff comes out. So stay tuned. I appreciate you guys dropping by for this one, and until next time, happy gaming.